I was driving past my son-in-law's house and decided to check on him, but when I saw my wife's car at the gate, a shiny silver Lexus that should have been in our garage, my heart clenched with a premonition of trouble. Something's wrong, I thought, and I quietly approached the window, trying not to give myself away. What I heard inside destroyed and changed my world forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for. Margaret's voice drifted through the half-open window like poison in my veins. I sat frozen in my car outside Brianna's house, keys still dangling from the ignition. 5 minutes ago, I'd called my daughter to surprise her with dinner plans. "Sorry, Dad, I'm not home, but Dan's there working on some case files," she'd said cheerfully. Yet here was Margaret's silver Lexus parked brazenly in the driveway. I killed the engine and approached the window on trembling legs. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see them clearly. My wife of 25 years lounging on my daughter's couch like she owned the place, and Dan leaning against the bookshelf with that smug expression I'd grown to despise. "The timeline's perfect," Dan was saying, his lawyer voice crisp with satisfaction. "File in June, claim irreconcilable differences. With the new Iowa statutes, Margaret's entitled to half of everything acquired during marriage, plus spousal support for life." Margaret laughed, that tinkling sound I'd once found charming. "The construction business alone is worth $12 million. Add the rental properties, the vacation home, investments. We're looking at nearly $20 million total." My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone, hitting record just as Dan continued his legal dissertation. The beautiful part is his trusting nature. Alan has no idea we've been documenting his assets for months. Bank statements, property deeds, business valuations, everything's already copied. He gestured toward a manila folder on the coffee table. He practically handed us the keys to his kingdom. 25 years of playing the devoted wife," Margaret said, examining her manicured nails. "Pretending to care about his boring construction stories, nodding sympathetically when he worried about payroll. God, the man actually believes I love him." A twig snapped under my foot. Both of them froze mid-conversation, heads turning toward the window like startled deer. I pressed myself against the brick wall, heart hammering against my ribs, sweat beading despite the April chill. "Did you hear something?" Margaret's voice carried a note of suspicion. "Probably just the neighbor's cat," Dan replied after a pause. "You're paranoid." "Can you blame me? If Alan discovered this before we're ready." "He won't. The man couldn't spot a conspiracy if it wore a neon sign." Dan's laughter held nothing but contempt. "By September, you'll be divorced, wealthy, and free to do whatever you want, with whoever you want." I forced myself to stay hidden until their conversation resumed, my phone capturing every venomous word. When I finally crept back to my car 15 minutes later, my entire world had shifted on its axis. 25 years of marriage reduced to a legal strategy session between my wife and son-in-law. The folder on that coffee table haunted me. Months of planning, documentation, preparation. While I'd been working 16-hour days to build our future, they'd been systematically mapping its destruction. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at my hands wrapped around the steering wheel, the same hands that had built a construction empire from nothing, that had provided every comfort Margaret enjoyed, that had walked her down the aisle when her own father refused to attend our wedding. Margaret's voice echoed in my memory. "The man actually believes I love him." The worst part? Until 30 minutes ago, I absolutely did. The front door opened just as I reached for my car keys. Margaret emerged first, her designer handbag swinging casually at her side, followed by Dan adjusting his tie with practiced precision. Neither expected to find me sitting in my Honda, and the shock registered on Margaret's face like a slap. "Alan?" Her voice climbed an octave. "What are you doing here?" I forced my expression into something resembling normalcy, though my pulse thundered in my ears. 25 years of marriage had taught me to read her moods, but apparently she'd been acting the entire time. "Just finished a job site inspection nearby," I lied smoothly, climbing out of the car. "Thought I'd stop by and see Brianna." Dan stepped protectively closer to Margaret, his lawyer instincts kicking in. Those pale gray eyes studied my face with uncomfortable intensity. searching for cracks in my story. "She's not here," Margaret said quickly. I was helping Dan organize some legal documents for a client." The lie rolled off her tongue with practiced ease. How many lies had I swallowed over the years without question? "Oh?" I kept my voice light, conversational. "I thought you'd be at work until 6 today. Didn't you mention something about the Henderson proposal this morning?" A flicker of panic crossed her features. "I left early. Headache." "Sorry to hear that." I turned to Dan with manufactured friendliness, working on an interesting case. "Asset division," he replied without thinking, then caught himself. "For a divorce client. Very complex financial situation. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't destroying my life." Margaret's eyes darted between Dan and me, calculating. "How long have you been here, Alan?" "Just pulled up. Why?" "No reason." But her smile looked painted on. "You seem tense. Everything okay?" The woman who'd plotted my financial ruin for months was asking about my well-being. I almost laughed. "A long day. You know how it is." I gestured toward Dan. "Don't let me interrupt your work session." "We were just finishing up," Dan said, his hand settling possessively on Margaret's lower back. The gesture seemed automatic. Intimate. How long had that been happening? "Good timing, then." I pulled out my phone to check the time, making sure they could see the device. Neither reacted, but I caught Dan's eyes lingering on the screen. I should head home anyway. Dinner won't cook itself. Margaret's laugh sounded forced. "I'll be along shortly. Just need to wrap up a few things here." "Take your time." I opened my car door, then paused as if remembering something. "Oh, Margaret." "Dr. Patterson's office called about rescheduling your physical. Something about a conflict with your work schedule?" Her face went blank for a split second, the look of someone whose lie had been exposed. Then she recovered with impressive speed. "Must be a mix-up. I'll call them later." "No worries. These things happen." I slid into the driver's seat, heart hammering. "See you both later." As I backed out of the driveway, I watched them in my rearview mirror. They stood frozen until my car disappeared around the corner, then immediately moved closer together, heads bent in urgent conversation. The three-way dance of deception was complete. They suspected I might have overheard something. I knew they were planning to destroy me, and all of us were pretending everything was perfectly normal. Margaret would drive home separately, armed with explanations for her early departure from work and her presence at Dan's house. She'd probably arrived at a dozen reasonable justifications by the time she walked through our front door, but she didn't know about the recording on my phone. 43 minutes of crystal-clear audio that would change everything. I pulled into traffic, hands steady on the wheel for the first time in an hour. The shock was wearing off, replaced by something colder and more focused. They thought they were playing chess with a checkers player. They were about to discover their mistake. The 15-minute drive home passed in a blur of traffic lights and muscle memory. My Honda found its way into our circular driveway without conscious direction past the manicured gardens. Margaret insisted we pay someone else to maintain, past the fountain she'd commissioned for our 20th anniversary. I sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the house I'd built with my own hands in 1995. Every board, every nail, every carefully planned detail had been a love letter to the woman who was now plotting to steal it from me. The front door opened into silence that felt different now, not peaceful, but hollow. Margaret's presence had always filled these rooms with chatter about her day, complaints about neighbors, excitement over new purchases. Now I wondered how much of it had been performance. The wedding photo on the mantel caught my eye first. December 15th, 1987, Margaret radiant in ivory silk, me awkward in a rented tuxedo, both of us glowing with what I'd believed was genuine happiness. She'd been 22, working as a secretary at Morrison & Associates downtown. I was 37, my construction business finally turning real profit after 10 years of 12-hour days and instant noodle dinners. We'd met at the company Christmas party that year. Morrison was a client. I'd renovated their offices the previous spring. Margaret had laughed at my terrible joke about concrete mixers, a sound like silver bells that made my chest tighten with unexpected longing. When I asked her to dinner, she'd blushed and said yes. So quickly I wondered if she'd been waiting for me to ask. Our first date at Romano's Italian restaurant stretched until midnight. She listened with genuine interest, as I described my dreams of building something lasting, something that would outlive us both. Her eyes sparkled when I talked about the houses I wanted to create, the families I wanted to shelter. "You're not just building structures," she'd said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "You're building homes." I'd proposed 6 months later. The kitchen table held our 25th anniversary card from last December, Margaret's handwriting still elegant in blue ink. "To my wonderful husband, thank you for making all my dreams come true. Here's to 25 more years of happiness. All my love, Margaret." All her love. The phrase tasted bitter now. I moved to the living room, where Brianna's baby pictures lined the built-in shelves I'd crafted during Margaret's pregnancy. June 8th, 1995. The day our daughter was born, Margaret exhausted but radiant, holding our red-faced miracle like she'd been created for motherhood. Those first years had been the happiest of my life. Margaret threw herself into being a mother with the same intensity she'd once brought to planning our wedding. Parent-teacher conferences, soccer games, birthday parties with elaborate themes. She documented every moment with fierce maternal pride. "You're the best father in the world," she'd told me the night Brianna graduated high school, tears streaming down her face as we watched our daughter accept her diploma. "She's going to do incredible things because of the foundation you gave her. The foundation I gave her. Not we. I. Had the cracks been showing even then? I sank into my leather recliner, the one Margaret always complained was too ugly for the formal living room, and let the memories wash over me. Our 10th anniversary cruise to Alaska, Margaret genuinely delighted by the glaciers and wildlife. Brianna's college graduation, all of us crying as she walked across the stage with her psychology degree. Christmas mornings filled with laughter and chaos. Margaret insisting on elaborate decorations that took weeks to install and one day to dismantle. When had gratitude transformed into entitlement? When had "thank you for providing this life" become "we deserve so much more"? The recording on my phone held the answer. Margaret hadn't loved me in years, possibly decades. Every kiss, every anniversary celebration, every "I love you" whispered in the darkness had been calculated. Manipulation designed to keep me working, earning, building wealth she could eventually claim as her own. 25 years of my life reduced to a legal strategy session. I sat in the growing darkness of our living room, surrounded by the evidence of what I'd believed was a happy marriage, and felt something cold and analytical settling over the grief. Margaret thought she was playing the long game, positioning herself for maximum financial gain while maintaining plausible deniability. She had no idea her husband possessed the same strategic mind that had built a construction empire from nothing. The game was about to change. The living room's silence wrapped around me as I forced myself to think like the businessman I'd always been. When had Margaret's behavior shifted from genuine partnership to calculated positioning? The answer came with uncomfortable clarity. 2020, when Cole Construction landed the Morrison Municipal Center contract. $50 million over 3 years, the largest project in company history. I'd come home that April evening expecting celebration, maybe champagne, definitely the enthusiastic support that had sustained me through every previous milestone. Instead, Margaret had been sitting at the kitchen table with a real estate magazine and a calculator. "This means we can finally afford the house on Elm Street," she'd announced without looking up. "The one with the circular driveway and the pool. The Hendersons are asking $4.2 million. Not congratulations on the achievement. Not pride in the work that would employ 300 people for 3 years. Just immediate focus on what my success could buy her. Margaret, I haven't even started the project yet. There's design work, permits, subcontractor negotiations. But the money's guaranteed, right?" She'd finally looked at me then, her green eyes calculating. "I mean, once you sign the contract, the city has to pay." The conversation had lasted 2 hours. She'd mapped out expenditures down to the last detail. The new house, country club membership, luxury cars, European vacations. Not our expenditures, hers. The pronouns had been telling, though I'd been too focused on project logistics to notice. By 2021, the demands had escalated. The country club membership became non-negotiable when the Pattersons joined Riverside Hills. Our perfectly adequate vacation cabin in Wisconsin became embarrassing compared to the Johnsons' place in Aspen. Margaret began dropping hints about other wives whose husbands really understood how to treat a woman. The physical intimacy disappeared gradually, so slowly I'd attributed it to age and stress. Separate bedrooms became necessary because of my snoring, though Margaret had never complained about snoring in 23 years of marriage. Dinner conversations shifted from discussions of our day to Margaret's detailed accounts of what other families owned, achieved, or displayed. Sarah Mitchell's husband bought her a Mercedes for their anniversary, she'd mentioned last month, cutting her salmon with surgical precision, just because he appreciated everything she'd sacrificed for their marriage. Sacrificed, as if supporting my career while living in luxury had required significant personal loss. The friendship with Dan had intensified after Brianna's wedding in September 2023. Suddenly, Margaret was fascinated by legal proceedings, asking hypothetical questions about property division and spousal rights for a friend who might need advice. She'd started receiving phone calls that sent her to the other room, claiming they were book club discussions or volunteer committee meetings. How many of those calls had been conspiracy sessions? I pulled out my phone and replayed segments of today's recording. Dan's voice. We've been documenting his assets for months. Margaret's laughter. 25 years of playing the devoted wife. The documentation made sense now. Margaret's sudden interest in my financial reports. Her questions about business valuations. Her insistence on joint accounts while maintaining her own separate credit cards. She'd been conducting reconnaissance while I'd been building the very empire she planned to steal. But Margaret had made a crucial error in her strategic planning. She'd underestimated the man who'd built Cole Construction from a single truck and a borrowed tool set. The same analytical mind that had navigated 35 years of construction projects, labor negotiations, and municipal contracts was now focused on a different kind of problem solving. They thought they were playing chess with someone who didn't know the rules. Margaret had spent months positioning her pieces while assuming I'd never noticed the board. She was about to discover that her husband understood strategy better than she'd ever imagined. I stood up from the recliner and walked to my home office, where files containing 35 years of business records lined built-in shelves. Tax returns, contracts, partnership agreements, property deeds, everything Margaret thought she'd been secretly documenting. But I knew something she didn't. The real assets weren't in those files. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Marcus Webb, my accountant, my friend, and the only person who knew about the offshore arrangements I'd established years ago for tax optimization purposes. Time to make a call that would change everything. 3 days of methodical research had transformed my home office into a war room. 2 laptops hummed quietly on the mahogany desk I'd built 15 years ago, their screens displaying bank statements, legal databases, and property records. Yellow legal pads covered every surface, filled with columns labeled assets, weaknesses, timeline, and leverage points. I'd shaved carefully that morning, put on my best navy suit, and slipped on the reading glasses Margaret always said made me look distinguished. Strange how quickly grief could crystallize into strategy when you had 35 years of business experience to draw from. Marcus Webb had been more helpful than I dared hope. 3 offshore accounts I'd established years ago for tax optimization, completely legal, fully documented but invisible to anyone without forensic accounting skills. Margaret's amateur reconnaissance mission had missed the real treasure. She'd been cataloging the visible kingdom while the crown jewels remained hidden in plain sight. But Margaret had been busy too. Her credit card statements told a fascinating story. $47,000 in unauthorized transfers over 8 months, funneled to a joint savings account I'd never opened. The beneficiary name made my jaw clench. Daniel Thompson. They'd been positioning themselves as financial partners long before their divorce conspiracy began. Luxury lunches at Riverside Country Club, $300 spa treatments, designer clothing purchases that coincided suspiciously with her book club meetings. Every expense painted a picture of a woman preparing for a different life. The 8 out of 500 Hermdaughters handbag she'd bought last Tuesday carried particular irony, given that she'd complained about grocery costs just that morning. Dan's vulnerabilities proved even more illuminating. My construction industry contacts had been generous with information about Davenport's most ambitious attorney. The man who planned to steal my fortune was drowning in debt. $180,000 in student loans, an $8,500 monthly office lease chosen for image over prudence, and a growing reputation for cutting ethical corners when payment schedules got tight. Thompson's a sharp lawyer, Jim Morrison from Morrison Concrete had told me over coffee. But he's got champagne tastes on a beer budget. Owes 3 of my subcontractors nearly $25,000 total. Always promises payment next week and then disappears when the bills come due. The State Bar Association's website revealed 2 dismissed ethical complaints in the past year, both involving client fund mismanagement. Dismissed, but documented. In legal circles, even unsuccessful complaints left stains on professional reputations. I leaned back in my leather chair, surveying the intelligence gathered over 72 hours of patient investigation. Margaret and Dan had underestimated their opponent catastrophically. They'd seen a trusting husband who worked long hours and rarely questioned household expenses. They'd failed to recognize the analytical mind that had built Cole Construction from a single truck into a $12 million enterprise. The phone rang, jarring me from my strategic reverie. Brianna's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, sweetheart." I kept my voice warm, normal. "How's your day going?" "Dad, I need to ask you something." Her tone carried the careful neutrality she used with troubled patients. "Is everything okay between you and Mom lately? There's been this weird tension whenever I'm around both of you." My hand tightened on the phone. How much did she know? How much had Dan told her about their conspiracy? What makes you ask? "Little things. Mom seems stressed about money, which is strange since business has been so good. And Dan keeps asking weird questions about your company structure, like how the partnerships work and who controls what assets." She paused. "It feels like they're fishing for information, but I can't figure out why." Fishing for information? My daughter's psychology training had detected the predatory behavior her mother and husband thought they'd hidden. "Probably just curiosity about how the business world works," I said carefully. "Your mom's always been interested in financial security?" "Maybe." But Brianna didn't sound convinced. "Dad, if something was wrong, I mean really wrong, you'd tell me, right?" The question hung between us like a loaded weapon. Tell her what? That her mother was planning to destroy me financially? That her husband was orchestrating the whole conspiracy? That the family she'd trusted her entire life was built on lies? "Of course, sweetheart, but everything's fine. Just the usual business pressures." After we hung up, I sat staring at my research notes. Dan had been pumping my daughter for information about my business structure. The scope of their intelligence-gathering operation was broader than I'd realized. Time to make sure they got exactly the information I wanted them to have. I was still processing Brianna's warning about Dan's fishing expedition when my secure phone line rang. Sarah Chen, my accountant for 12 years, her voice crisp with professional efficiency. "Alan, I've got the asset protection documents ready for signature. When you mentioned wanting to update estate planning, I took the liberty of researching optimal structures." A pause. "This is about more than estate planning, isn't it? How perceptive of you. 28 years in forensic accounting teaches you to read between the lines. Should I ask what kind of threat we're protecting against?" "The domestic variety." Sarah's silence spoke volumes. She'd handled 3 divorces for my construction crew supervisors. She knew the landscape. "I'll have everything ready by noon," she said. "The business assets will be completely insulated from any personal legal action. Whoever's planning to take a run at your personal finances won't even see the real money." By 10 a.m., I was sitting across from Tom Bradley, president of First National Bank and my golf partner for 15 years. The mahogany conference room smelled of coffee and leather, familiar territory where I'd negotiated dozens of construction loans. "Account security review," I said, sliding documents across the polished table. "I need all joint access points verified and temporarily frozen pending identity confirmation." Tom's eyebrows rose slightly. "This is comprehensive, Alan? Every joint account, credit line, and automatic payment system?" "Every single one." "May I ask?" "You may not." But I smiled when I said it. "How long for the security holds to take effect?" "Immediately upon your signature, all account holders will receive notification that access requires in-person verification, with photo ID and secondary documentation. Tom studied my face. This is going to inconvenience Margaret significantly. I'm counting on it. The security holds activated at 11:47 a.m., just as Margaret was sitting down for her weekly lunch at Riverside Country Club with 3 other construction wives. My phone buzzed with the first declined transaction at 12:03 p.m. I was reviewing contractor bids when Margaret's panicked call came at 12:50. Alan, something's wrong with our accounts. My card was declined at lunch, and when I called the bank, they said there's a security hold. Do you know anything about this? Perfect innocence. No mention of the joint account with Dan's name. No acknowledgement of the missing $47,000. No admission that she'd been moving money without my knowledge. Security hold? That sounds serious. Did they say what triggered it? Something about verifying identity and account access? It's embarrassing, Alan. I'm sitting here with Linda and Susan and Janet, and I can't even pay for my own lunch. The distress in her voice was genuine, not because her conspiracy was threatened, but because her social status had been publicly compromised. After 25 years of marriage, I knew Margaret's priorities. I'll call Tom Bradley immediately, I assured her. We'll get this sorted out. But I didn't call Tom. Instead, I drove to the construction site where my crew was pouring foundation for the new medical center. The familiar sounds of machinery and worker voices felt grounding after 3 days of financial warfare. My phone buzzed with text messages throughout the afternoon. Margaret, 1:47 p.m. Still can't access any accounts. This is ridiculous. Margaret, 2:23 p.m. Tom Bradley's secretary says he's in meetings all day. What kind of bank president is too busy for his best customers? Margaret, 3:15 p.m. Even our emergency credit line is frozen. How am I supposed to buy groceries? Each message brought a grim satisfaction. For 25 years, Margaret had taken financial security for granted, while I worked 60-hour weeks to provide it. Now she was experiencing what it felt like when that security vanished without warning. Dan's reaction proved even more interesting. At 4:30 p.m., my private investigator, Mike Rodriguez, called with an update. Thompson tried to access his shared account with your wife 3 times this afternoon. When that failed, he attempted to withdraw funds from what appears to be a trust account, probably your daughter's education fund that he manages. That one's frozen too, per your instructions. His demeanor? Angry phone calls to bank representatives, threats about legal action, demands to speak with management. Classic overconfident attorney discovering his leverage has evaporated. By 6 p.m. I was home, reviewing the day's financial battlefield from my office. Every shared account frozen, every joint credit line suspended, every automatic payment system requiring my personal authorization. Margaret's access to 25 years of accumulated wealth had been reduced to whatever cash she carried in her purse. The security measures were completely legal. A husband protecting marital assets, pending estate planning review. Tom Bradley would confirm that standard banking protocols had been followed precisely. But Margaret and Dan would understand the message perfectly. The man they'd planned to financially ambush was no longer playing defense. My phone rang at 6:47 p.m., Margaret's number, but the voice that answered would be desperate now, not manipulative. Time to see how quickly conspirators turned on each other when their plans started crumbling. The after-hours security guard at Thompson & Associates barely looked up as Margaret rushed through the lobby at 7:15 p.m., her heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. I knew this because Mike Rodriguez had positioned himself in the coffee shop across the street with a clear view of the building entrance. The frantic call Margaret had made from our driveway, "Dan, we need to talk immediately. Something's gone terribly wrong," had been loud enough for our next-door neighbor to overhear. Not that Margaret cared about discretion anymore. On the 14th floor, Dan's corner office glowed with emergency session intensity. Through his window, anyone with binoculars could see 2 figures hunched over a conference table covered with documents, their body language screaming crisis management. He knows. Margaret's voice carried through the building's older ventilation system to the accounting firm next door, where Mike's contact maintained an office. Alan knows something, and he's cutting off everything. I couldn't even buy gas for my car. Dan's response was sharp, professional, his litigation voice engaged. The timing isn't coincidental. 3 days ago you said he showed up unexpectedly at Brianna's house, right when we were discussing strategy. He must have overheard something. How much could he have heard? Enough to understand we're not playing around. Papers rustled as Dan reviewed documents. Margaret, we need to assume he recorded our conversation. Everything we said about assets, timeline, strategy, all of it potentially documented. The silence that followed spoke volumes. Two conspirators, realizing their victim had been several moves ahead, while they'd congratulated themselves on their cleverness. What do we do? Margaret's voice had lost its earlier confidence. We accelerate everything. No more gradual approach, no more careful positioning. Monday morning, I file for emergency divorce proceedings with immediate spousal support. We claim Alan is engaging in financial abuse by restricting your access to marital assets. Financial abuse? Margaret's tone sharpened with interest. That sounds legally compelling, Dan finished. We paint him as a controlling husband who uses money to manipulate and intimidate. The frozen accounts become evidence of his abusive patterns, not defensive strategy. More rustling papers, the sound of a legal mind shifting into full attack mode. I'll need you to document instances of emotional abuse, financial control, intimidation tactics. Think back over your marriage. Anytime Alan made financial decisions without consulting you. Anytime he questioned your spending. Anytime he used money to influence your behavior. That's going to be difficult, Dan. Alan's never been controlling about money. If anything, he's been too generous. Then we reframe generosity as manipulation. His providing for you becomes evidence that he created financial dependency to maintain control. Every gift, every luxury, every comfortable lifestyle choice becomes proof of his systematic isolation strategy. The breathtaking audacity was impressive in its scope. They were planning to weaponize 25 years of Alan's dedication and generosity, twisting every act of love into evidence of abuse. What about Brianna? Margaret asked. She's not going to automatically take my side. Her psychology training makes her skeptical of everything. That's actually perfect. Dan's voice carried the satisfaction of a man who'd found his closing argument. Brianna's hesitation to support you immediately becomes evidence of how thoroughly Alan has manipulated family dynamics. We position her psychology training as something Alan exploited to turn his own daughter against her mother's emotional needs. You want to make our daughter a witness against her father? I want to save your financial future, Margaret. Brianna's professional training means her testimony carries extra weight. If she expresses any concern about family dynamics, we frame it as expert psychological opinion, confirming Alan's manipulative patterns. The plan was elegant in its comprehensive evil. Turn the daughter's professional skepticism into evidence against the father. Reframe every act of love as manipulation. Transform defensive financial protection into proof of abuse. Monday morning, Dan continued, I file for emergency restraining orders preventing further asset movement, immediate spousal support of $15,000 monthly, and temporary exclusive occupancy of the marital home. By Wednesday, we'll have him painted as an abusive husband who needs court supervision to prevent further financial intimidation. And if he fights back, then we escalate harassment charges if he contacts you directly, stalking allegations if he investigates our activities, emotional abuse claims if he questions any of our accusations. Dan's voice carried cold satisfaction. The beauty of domestic abuse law is that denial becomes evidence of guilt. The harder he fights, the more controlling he appears. Margaret's laughter held no warmth. Poor Alan, he has no idea what he's unleashed. 25 years of playing the trusting husband, time to teach him that nice guys finish last. They spent another hour coordinating their stories, establishing secure communication methods, and preparing for what Dan called total legal warfare. Every conversation, every interaction, every financial transaction would be documented as evidence of Alan's systematic abuse pattern. The conspiracy had evolved from simple asset grab to character assassination campaign designed to destroy not just Alan's finances, but his reputation, his relationship with his daughter, and his standing in the community he'd helped build for 3 decades. As Margaret finally left the building at 9:30 p.m., her phone was already buzzing with Dan's first strategic text. Remember, you're not an angry wife anymore. You're a terrified victim finally finding courage to escape your abuser. The war had officially begun. Saturday morning found Margaret and Brianna at Caf Luna, the bistro where they'd shared monthly mother-daughter brunches for 5 years. Margaret had chosen their usual corner table. Intimate, private, perfect for confidential conversations. But this time she'd positioned herself as a woman, seeking her daughter's professional help, rather than maternal support. "Brianna, I need to talk to you about your father." Margaret's voice carried carefully calibrated vulnerability. I think something's wrong with him mentally." Brianna set down her coffee cup with the deliberate precision she used when shifting into therapist mode. "What kind of wrong, Mom?" "Controlling behaviors, paranoid thinking. He's been restricting my access to our accounts, claiming it's for security reasons, but—" Margaret let her voice trail off, allowing her daughter's imagination to fill the blanks. "How long has this been going on?" "Months, maybe longer. I just attributed it to work stress. But yesterday he completely froze me out of every account we share. I couldn't even buy lunch." Brianna leaned forward, her psychological training engaged despite personal involvement. "Mom, financial control can be a form of domestic abuse, but it can also be legitimate financial management during business transitions or legal concerns. What's Dad's explanation?" The question was too direct, too professionally neutral. Margaret had expected emotional support, not clinical analysis. "He claims it's routine account security, but Brianna, I've been married to him for 25 years. This isn't routine. This is punishment for something." "Punishment for what?" Margaret hesitated. How much could she reveal without exposing her own conspiracy? "I think he suspects I've been questioning our marriage. Maybe he's trying to intimidate me into staying." "Mom." Brianna's voice carried the patience of someone who'd spent years treating manipulative patients. "Are you telling me Dad is financially abusing you to prevent divorce? Or are you telling me you're considering divorce and Dad is protecting assets?" The distinction cut too close to truth. Margaret shifted tactics. "I'm telling you that your father has been exhibiting concerning behavioral changes. And as a psychologist, I thought you might have insights about what's happening." As a psychologist, I'd say that major behavioral changes usually have identifiable triggers. What happened 3 days ago that might have caused Dad to suddenly restrict account access? Margaret's mind raced. Brianna was too well trained to accept emotional manipulation without evidence. Every question revealed the gaps in Margaret's victim narrative. "I don't know what triggered it. That's what scares me." But Brianna was studying her mother's face with clinical detachment, reading micro-expressions and verbal inconsistencies with professional skill. "Mom, are you asking for psychological advice? Or are you asking me to take sides in a marital conflict?" The blunt question shattered Margaret's manipulation strategy. Her daughter wasn't going to provide the emotional support that would validate her victim narrative. "I'm asking you to help me understand what's happening to our family. Then I suggest you have an honest conversation with Dad about his concerns, instead of asking me to psychoanalyze him based on your interpretation of his behavior." Margaret left the caf. 20 minutes later, furious at her daughter's professional detachment and worried about the implications. If Brianna refused to automatically support her mother's claims, the victim narrative would collapse under professional scrutiny. Meanwhile, 40 miles away at Cole Construction's headquarters, I was receiving intelligence that would reshape the entire battlefield. Jim Morrison's call came at 10:15 a.m., just as I was reviewing weekend job site reports. "Alan, thought you'd want to know. Dan Thompson's got problems brewing with the State Bar Association. Word is they're investigating his handling of contractor payments on the Mitchell case." "What kind of problems?" 3 subcontractors filed complaints about non-payment last month. Thompson collected fees from his client, but never distributed payments to the trades. Classic trust account violation if they can prove it. I set down my coffee, mind immediately calculating the implications. How serious? Serious enough that the Bar Association scheduled a hearing for next week. Thompson's scrambling to find $23,000 to make the subcontractors whole before the investigation concludes. $23,000, the exact amount Dan owed according to my research. Jim, Would those subcontractors be willing to discuss their experience with Thompson if someone from the construction community reached out? Absolutely. These guys are furious. Thompson promised payment for 6 months, always had excuses, always blamed delays on his client or court procedures. They're small operators who can't afford to absorb those losses. I spent the next 3 hours making strategic phone calls. Bob Martinez from Martinez Electrical, who'd been waiting 8 months for $7,400. Steve Chen from Chen Plumbing, owed $9,200 since last October. Randy Foster from Foster Roofing, still waiting for $6,500 from a job completed in November. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Professional courtesy calls from Cole Construction checking references before potentially hiring Thompson for legal services. Each contractor eager to share warnings about Dan's payment practices, ethical shortcuts, and professional unreliability. By 1 p.m., I had documented evidence of Dan's systematic pattern of using client trust accounts as personal banking, violating state bar regulations, and misleading subcontractors about payment timelines. At 2:30 p.m., I called the State Bar Association's ethical complaint hotline. I'd like to file a formal complaint about attorney misconduct, I told the intake specialist. Daniel Thompson has engaged in a pattern of client trust account violations and has made misleading representations to construction industry professionals. The complaint form asked for detailed documentation. I provided contractor names, amounts owed, timeline of misrepresentations, and evidence of Dan's systematic abuse of client funds. 3 additional contractors agreed to serve as witnesses if needed. By 4 p.m., Dan's law office was receiving calls from the Bar Association about expedited investigation procedures and mandatory hearing attendance. His professional reputation, the foundation of his conspiracy against me, was now under formal ethical review. At 4:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Mike Rodriguez. Thompson just left his office carrying 3 boxes of files, heading toward his car. Want me to follow? No need, I typed back. I know exactly where he's going. Dan would be driving straight to Margaret, panic overriding his usual caution. The conspiracy that had begun with confidence and careful planning was about to become a desperate scramble for survival. Let them panic. Let them make mistakes. The real war was just beginning. 2 days of professional crisis had given Brianna time to process everything she'd learned. The drive to Cole Construction's headquarters felt like traveling toward a reckoning she'd been avoiding her entire adult life. My office building stood solid against the April sky. Brick and steel and honest workmanship, everything Dan's glass tower pretended to be but wasn't. Sarah, my secretary for 8 years, greeted Brianna with the warmth reserved for family members, who actually showed up to job sites and company picnics. He's expecting you, honey. Go right in. I stood when she entered, reading her body language with the careful attention I'd learned from watching Margaret's moods for 25 years. But Brianna carried herself differently. Professional posture, clinical distance, the bearing of someone who'd made difficult decisions. Dad, we need to discuss what's happening between you and Mom. Her voice held the careful neutrality she used with troubled patience. I've spent 2 days analyzing the situation, and I need to understand your perspective. What's your mother told you? That you're exhibiting controlling behaviors, financial manipulation, possible emotional abuse. She sat across from my desk, hands folded precisely. She wants me to support her victim narrative using my professional credentials. The clinical language was jarring coming from my daughter, but I recognized her strategy. Distance herself emotionally to evaluate facts objectively. And what do you think? I think Mom tried to manipulate me the same way she's apparently been manipulating you. Brianna's green eyes, so much like Margaret's, but clearer somehow, studied my face. Show me the evidence, Dad. I need to hear what you heard. I hesitated. Once I played that recording, there would be no protecting her from the truth about her mother and husband. But Brianna was 30 years old, a licensed psychologist, capable of handling reality. I pressed play on my phone. Margaret's voice filled the office. When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for. Brianna's expression didn't change for the first minute. Professional detachment held as she listened to her mother mock 25 years of marriage, heard Dan calculate legal strategies for maximum financial damage, absorbed their cold discussion of timeline and asset division. But when Margaret said, 25 years of playing the devoted wife, Brianna's composure cracked slightly. Her hands clenched once, then relaxed. The recording ended. Silence stretched between us like a bridge neither wanted to cross first. How long have you known? She asked finally. 6 days. I overheard this conversation at your house last Tuesday. And you've been... what? Building a defense strategy while pretending everything was normal? Something like that. She leaned back in her chair, processing. Mom asked me to evaluate your mental state. She wanted me to provide professional opinion that you were exhibiting abusive patterns. What did you tell her? That I couldn't ethically assess someone without proper evaluation, that her claims seemed inconsistent with your established behavioral patterns. Brianna's voice carried a note of anger now. She tried to use my training as a weapon, Dad, against you and against professional standards. The weight of betrayal, not just mine but hers, settled between us. I'm sorry you've been dragged into this, sweetheart. I'm not. Her tone sharpened with resolve. I'm glad I know the truth. The question is, what happens now? I studied my daughter's face. Seeing strength I'd helped build, but independence I couldn't control. That's your choice, Brianna. I won't ask you to choose sides. I already have. She stood up. Decision made. I choose truth over family loyalty. I choose evidence over emotion. And I choose to support the parent who didn't try to manipulate my professional ethics. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by concern. What about Dan? What about him? Her voice went cold. My husband participated in a conspiracy to financially destroy my father while using my psychology practice as cover. That marriage is over. Brianna, Dad, I'm not making this decision in anger. I'm making it based on character assessment and behavioral evidence. She moved toward the door, then paused. I'll testify honestly about family dynamics, if needed, but I won't be anyone's weapon, including yours. I understand. Good, because there's one more thing I need to do. She left my office with the determined stride of someone who'd found moral clarity in a situation designed to destroy it. 20 minutes later, she'd be walking into her own home to confront the man who'd betrayed not just me, but the professional ethics she'd spent years building. I sat alone in my office, surrounded by the evidence of 35 years of honest work, and felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. Hope that truth might actually matter. Brianna's key turned in the lock at 7:30 p.m., and Dan's startled expression revealed he hadn't expected her home early. He sprawled on our living room couch, legal documents scattered across the coffee table, a half-empty whiskey bottle within reach. We need to talk, I announced, setting my purse down with deliberate precision. Rough day? He didn't look up from whatever case file he was pretending to review. The Barrett deposition got postponed again. I know about the conspiracy, Dan. His head snapped up. The careful lawyer's mask slipped, revealing something desperate underneath. What conspiracy? The one where you and my mother planned to financially destroy my father, while using my psychology credentials to support false abuse allegations. I remained standing, maintaining advantage. I heard the recording. Every word. He set down his whiskey glass with exaggerated calm. Brianna, I think you're misunderstanding. 25 years of playing the devoted wife. Sound familiar? The color drained from his face. Dan Thompson, who could argue cases before the state Supreme Court, suddenly looked like a man watching his world collapse. How much did you hear? Everything. Asset division strategy, timeline, your fee calculation, Mom's performance reviews. I sat across from him, maintaining professional distance. Was our entire marriage part of this plan? 3 days later, Margaret discovered that social destruction moved faster than legal proceedings. The Riverside Country Club's dining room buzzed with Saturday brunch conversation, but clusters of women fell silent as she approached their tables. Linda Patterson, her bridge partner for 5 years, became fascinated by her eggs, Benedict, when Margaret stopped to say hello. Susan Morrison claimed an urgent phone call rather than continue their conversation. By the time Margaret reached her usual table, she understood that the conspiracy had become public knowledge. Margaret, dear. Janet Crawford's voice carried false sweetness. We missed you at the planning committee meeting yesterday. What meeting? I wasn't informed. Oh, didn't you get the message? We had to make some organizational changes. You understand. Margaret was beginning to recognize the pattern. Phone calls not returned. Invitations rescinded. Social doors closing with whispered efficiency. Meanwhile, I conducted my own campaign with considerably more success. 35 years of honest dealing had earned me credibility that no legal maneuvering could destroy. My lunch with Tom Bradley at the bank proved strategically productive. I shared concerns about family difficulties with just enough detail to establish facts without appearing vindictive. Margaret and our son-in-law apparently developed concerning plans regarding our assets. I mentioned over coffee. I've had to implement protective measures. Tom's response was exactly what I'd hoped for. Professional understanding mixed with personal sympathy for a friend dealing with family betrayal. The Chamber of Commerce board meeting that evening proved equally valuable. When Jim Morrison asked about Margaret's absence from the recent fundraising dinner, I explained with genuine sadness about marriage difficulties that have come to light. Sometimes you discover people aren't who you thought they were, I said, allowing disappointment to show. 25 years of marriage, and it turns out she was planning, well, I'm grateful I found out when I did. By Sunday evening, Margaret's social isolation was complete. The country club membership committee scheduled a routine review of her status. The charity board accepted her resignation from positions she'd never submitted. Dan's professional collapse accelerated alongside Margaret's social exile. 3 major clients terminated relationships, citing concerns about judgment and ethical standards. The Miller Industries account, worth $200,000 annually, sent a formal letter expressing loss of confidence in counsel's professional discretion. Margaret's frantic Sunday night call to Dan carried desperation I could hear through their apartment's thin walls. Everyone knows Dan. Everyone. I can't show my face anywhere in this town. We'll file emergency motions Monday morning. Force Alan into defensive position. Before what? Before you lose your law license? Before I move back to my sister's house in Minnesota? Their mutual recrimination session lasted until midnight, 2 conspirators discovering that shared guilt wasn't the same as shared solutions. Tomorrow would bring their last desperate gambit. I was ready. Monday morning found Margaret in Linda Hawthorne's downtown office, a divorce attorney whose reputation for scorched earth tactics had earned her both notoriety and high fees. The glass conference room overlooked the courthouse where Margaret hoped to destroy me, but the lawyer's expression suggested limited optimism. Mrs. Cole, I've reviewed your materials. Linda's voice carried professional skepticism. Your husband's financial protective measures appear legally sound. Joint account holders have rights to restrict access during marital discord. But it's financial abuse! Margaret's desperation leaked through her victim persona. He's controlling every aspect of my access to money we earned together. Money he earned, according to tax records spanning 25 years. Linda consulted her notes. Your income contributions appear minimal. You haven't been employed outside the home since 1989. Margaret's face flushed. Being a homemaker had represented luxury and security. Now it looked like evidence of dependency. What about emotional abuse, intimidation tactics? What specific incidents can you document? The question hung in the air. Margaret had spent sleepless nights trying to construct believable abuse patterns from 25 years of Alan's genuine consideration and generosity. He's controlling about money, always has been. Can you provide examples of threats, physical intimidation, isolation from family or friends? Well, no, but Mrs. Cole, domestic abuse cases require evidence. Has your husband ever threatened you physically, prevented you from leaving the house, monitored your communications? Each question struck holes in Margaret's fabricated narrative. Alan had never raised his voice in anger, never restricted her activities, never questioned her friendships. 10 blocks away, Dan discovered that bar association investigations moved with bureaucratic efficiency when they wanted answers. Monday morning's ethics committee call carried implications beyond contractor payment delays. Mr. Thompson, we've received additional complaints regarding your handling of client trust accounts, specifically allegations that you've been using client funds for personal expenses, pending case resolution. Dan's hand tightened on the phone. Those allegations are unfounded. I've always maintained proper accounting. We have documentation from Martinez Electrical showing invoices submitted 8 months ago with promises of payment, pending client approval. Yet your client settled 6 months ago. Where are those funds currently? The answer was his personal checking account, where contractor payments had been diverted to cover office rent and student loans. What had seemed like resourceful cash flow management now appeared as embezzlement. There may have been administrative delays. Mr. Thompson, we're scheduling a formal hearing for Thursday morning. You'll need complete financial records for all client accounts dating back 18 months. By Wednesday evening, Margaret and Dan had reached the desperation that breeds dangerous decisions. Their emergency strategy session in Dan's nearly empty office felt like generals planning a final assault with no ammunition. We have to file domestic violence claims, Margaret announced with false confidence. It's the only way to force him into defensive position. Margaret, false domestic violence allegations are felony charges if we're caught, given the evidence he probably has. What evidence? I've never said anything in front of cameras or witnesses that would contradict. She stopped, remembering the recording that started this cascade. The recording proves we were planning financial strategy, not documenting his abuse. So we reframe it. Your legal expertise, my victim testimony. Make the narrative about long-term emotional manipulation and financial control. Dan stared at her across the conference table. 6 months ago, she'd been a bored housewife, seeking excitement. Now she was proposing perjury in federal court. If this fails, we're both facing criminal charges. If we don't try, I'm facing poverty, and you're facing disbarment anyway. Margaret's voice carried the calculation of someone who'd lost everything except the ability to take others down. At least this way, we go down fighting. Thursday morning's restraining order hearing would determine whether their Hail Mary succeeded, or whether they'd simply provided Allen with more conspiracy evidence. Neither realized their opponent had spent the entire week documenting every phone call, every desperate meeting, every lie they'd told to lawyers and friends. Allen Cole wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was building a prosecution case. The Davenport County Courthouse felt different on May 1st, as if 35 years of honest reputation had crystallized into something tangible I could carry into battle. Judge Patricia Hendricks presided over domestic relations court with no-nonsense efficiency, having seen every form of family deception imaginable. Margaret sat at the plaintiff's table with Linda Hawthorne, wearing the carefully chosen outfit of a battered wife. Conservative dress, minimal makeup, nervous demeanor that might have been genuine given the stakes. Mrs. Cole, Judge Hendricks began, reviewing the emergency restraining order petition, you allege your husband has engaged in financial abuse and intimidation. Can you describe specific incidents that led you to fear for your safety? Margaret's voice trembled with practiced vulnerability. Your Honor, for months my husband has been restricting my access to our accounts, monitoring my spending, making threats about what would happen if I tried to leave. What kind of threats, Mrs. Cole? Financial threats, that I'd be left with nothing, that he'd use his business connections to destroy my reputation. Margaret paused for effect. Last week he completely cut off my access to money, even for basic necessities. I watched my wife of 25 years perjure herself with increasing confidence. Each lie built upon the previous one, creating fictional abuse from a man who'd spent decades providing every comfort she'd demanded. Judge Hendricks turned to my attorney, James Morrison. Does the defendant wish to respond? James stood with calm authority, earned through 30 years practicing law without suborning perjury. Your Honor, we have evidence that Mrs. Cole's claims are not only false, but part of a deliberate conspiracy to defraud the defendant of marital assets. That's a serious allegation, Counselor. We have audio recording of Mrs. Cole and her co-conspirator, Daniel Thompson, planning this exact scenario 6 weeks ago. Margaret's face went white. Linda Hawthorne whispered frantically in her client's ear, but damage control was impossible when your entire case was built on lies. I'd like to present Exhibit A, James continued, connecting his phone to the courtroom's audio system. Margaret's voice filled the chamber. When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for. For 43 minutes, Judge Hendricks listened to the complete conspiracy unfold. Margaret's mockery of our marriage, Dan's legal strategies for asset seizure, their calculated plan to manipulate Brianna's psychology credentials. The man actually believes I love him, Margaret's recorded voice declared with casual cruelty. I watched my wife's fabricated victim narrative crumble in real time. Her coach testimony about fearing for her safety became absurd when contrasted with her recorded laughter about manipulating the old fool. Judge Hendricks stopped the recording. Mrs. Cole, do you have any response to this evidence? Margaret's mouth opened and closed silently. Linda Hawthorne's face had gone pale as she realized her client had used her to file fraudulent court documents. Your Honor, Linda said carefully, I request permission to withdraw from this case. I was not informed of these circumstances when I agreed to representation. Motion granted. Judge Hendricks fixed Margaret with the stare she reserved for perjurers. Mrs. Cole, I'm dismissing your restraining order petition with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of possible perjury charges. The gavel fell with finality that echoed through the courtroom. 2 weeks later, the divorce settlement reflected Margaret's spectacular miscalculation. Her documented deception eliminated any claim to spousal support, and the prenuptial agreement she'd forgotten, signed eagerly in 1907, limited her to minimal asset division. Dan's law license suspension became permanent revocation when the Bar Association discovered $127,000 in missing client funds. Last I heard, he'd moved to Nebraska and was working as a paralegal. Brianna filed for divorce the day after the hearing, citing irreconcilable differences. She's building a new practice focused on family therapy, with particular expertise in recognizing manipulation patterns. 6 months later, Margaret works retail at the same mall where she once spent my money on luxury items. The irony isn't lost on either of us. I rebuilt Cole Construction's reputation stronger than before. The community's support during my family difficulties translated into new contracts and deeper business relationships. The house feels different now, quieter but honest. No more performed conversations or calculated affection. Just the sound of rain on windows I built with my own hands, in a home that's finally mine again. Margaret had been right about one thing. I really had believed she loved me. Now I know the difference between love and performance. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.